The recruiter is still talking, laying out the number, the title, the signing bonus. It's a good offer, objectively a great one. You say no, calmly, almost casually, the way you decline a second coffee. A version of you from a few years ago would have panicked at the thought of turning this down, would have said yes before the sentence even finished, because saying no to money like that used to feel unthinkable. Something's different now, not because the job wasn't good, because you didn't meet it to be. Here's what almost nobody explains clearly. There isn't one single moment where money finally stops controlling every decision you make. There are 4 distinct stages, each one changing what you're actually capable of turning down. Most people genuinely can't name which one they're standing in right now. You're about to find out exactly where this exact moment came from. Ask most people what financial independence actually means, and you'll get roughly the same answer over and over again. A number, usually a very big one. $1 million, sometimes considerably more, sitting quietly in an account somewhere, unlocking some vague, distant future version of freedom. That answer isn't wrong exactly. It's just incomplete in a way that quietly discourages a lot of people before they even really start trying. Because if financial independence only ever means one massive distant figure, it makes complete sense to feel like the whole idea is out of reach. Why bother tracking any progress towards something that feels impossibly far away, especially early on, when the number barely seems to move, no matter how much effort goes into it? Here's what actually changes that picture. Financial independence was never meant to be one single finish line. Inside the broader community of people who study and pursue this seriously, it's understood as a series of real, clearly defined stages, each one representing a genuine shift in what your money can do for you, long before you reach anything close to a final number. These stages actually have names. They have specific, agreed-upon definitions, used widely across personal finance communities and writing on the subject, refined over years of real people living through each phase. And each one unlocks a different kind of freedom, not just a bigger bank account sitting untouched somewhere. Some of these stages happen far earlier in the journey than most people assume, sometimes years before anyone would call themselves financially independent by the popular one-number definition. Others take much longer to reach and genuinely demand a very different kind of discipline, sustained over a much longer stretch of time. Understanding which specific stage you're actually working toward right now, instead of vaguely chasing one enormous number that never seems to get any closer, no matter what, changes how you plan, how you spend, and how you measure whether you're actually making any real progress at all. This distinction matters more than it might sound like at first. Someone chasing the single-number version of financial independence can easily spend a decade feeling like they've made almost no real progress at all, watching a distant total barely shift year over year despite genuine effort. Someone who understands the staged version of that same journey can instead recognize real, concrete milestones passing by along the way. Specific moments where genuine options quietly open up, long before the final number ever fully arrives, if it even does. So let's start at the very beginning of that ladder, right where most people's journey actually begins, whether they realize it or not. The earliest of these 4 stages doesn't require anywhere near as much as most people assume. And it changes something very specific the moment you actually cross it. Coast FI is the first real defined stage on this ladder, and it doesn't require anywhere near as much money as most people quietly assume it does. Here's what it actually means, in real, entirely practical terms. You've invested enough at some specific point along the way that if you simply left that money alone from here on, never adding another single dollar again, it would grow through ordinary, unremarkable compounding into a full retirement fund by a normal retirement age. Nothing more really needs to happen at all after that point. The math already works, quietly in the background. whether you keep contributing or not, whether you notice it or not. This is the exact moment where saving finally becomes optional, even if working itself still doesn't. That distinction matters enormously. And it's exactly why this particular stage gets skipped over in almost every conversation about financial independence you'll come across. People tend to assume real freedom only arrives once work itself becomes fully optional too, all at once. Coast FI proves that a real, meaningful shift can happen years before that final point ever arrives. One that changes the entire pressure sitting behind every future paycheck you'll ever earn. Once someone genuinely reaches this stage, something specific tends to happen with their entire career trajectory. The frantic drive to save aggressively, to chase every raise, to say yes to every extra shift, no matter how draining, tends to quiet down considerably. Income now only needs to cover the actual, real cost of living right now, not some imagined future stacked directly on top of it. That single shift changes what a job actually needs to provide someone. People at this stage often start choosing lower stress roles, even at lower pay, because the retirement math is already handled elsewhere, quietly running in the background regardless of what happens next. A demanding, high-paying position that used to feel absolutely necessary can suddenly feel like a choice instead of an obligation you're locked into. Someone might switch into work they actually enjoy, take a step back from constant overtime, or simply stop treating every single financial decision like it's protecting some distant, fragile future that depends entirely on this month's paycheck. None of this means the person stops working altogether. Coast FI rarely means full retirement, and it isn't meant to. It means the relationship between work and money quietly changes shape underneath the surface. Income becomes about funding today, not about defending some far-off tomorrow that used to feel constantly at risk. This is also the stage where the earlier idea about staged progress actually starts paying off in a very real, tangible way. Someone who understands they've genuinely reached Coast FI can make real, deliberate decisions from that position. Someone still chasing one enormous, undefined number has no real idea this shift already happened underneath them, and keeps grinding away at a pace their actual finances no longer strictly require. But Coast FI still comes with real, meaningful limits genuinely attached to it. It doesn't cover your current lifestyle without some form of ongoing income. It only guarantees the eventual future retirement piece, not the actual present. The next stage on this ladder changes that particular limitation in a very different, considerably more restrictive way entirely. Lean FI sits right next to Coast FI on this ladder, and you'll probably confuse the two at first, even though they actually work in almost completely opposite directions from one another. Coast FI still requires you to keep earning steady, ongoing income. It just removes the pressure to keep saving on top of it, quietly in the background. Lean FI does the opposite of that. It removes your need for income entirely, but only by covering a genuinely minimal, no-frills lifestyle indefinitely, without you ever needing to touch a job again for the rest of your life. Here's the actual, precise definition worth remembering carefully right now. You reach Lean FI when your invested assets can reliably sustain a stripped-down version of your life. Modest housing, basic living expenses, very little in the way of extras, for the rest of your entire life, without any further income needed at all. No paycheck required whatsoever. No side income needed either. Just your portfolio itself, quietly covering the essentials indefinitely, year after year. That sounds like real, genuine freedom on paper. And in one very specific, meaningful sense, it absolutely is. Work becomes fully optional at this stage, not just noticeably lower stress the way it was back at Coast FI. But the freedom comes wrapped in a real trade-off that Coast FI never actually asked you to make in the first place. This is where the identity mismatch shows up most clearly. And it shows up constantly, in ways that can genuinely frustrate you. You've technically achieved full financial independence already at this stage. You could stop working tomorrow and never need another paycheck for the rest of your life. But because your day-to-day lifestyle doesn't look wealthy in any obvious way, a smaller apartment, an older car, no lavish spending anywhere in sight, people around you often assume you're struggling financially, or that you haven't really made it yet, or that real retirement for you is still years away. Family members ask when you're finally going to get a real job again, not realizing there's no financial need to. Friends assume your modest lifestyle means money is tight, rather than understanding it's a deliberate, calculated choice you made years earlier. The entire external read on your life gets it completely backwards, because financial independence, at this specific stage, doesn't announce itself through visible spending. It shows up in the complete absence of financial pressure underneath the surface, which is essentially invisible to almost everyone watching from outside, no matter how closely they're paying attention. This is the exact opposite kind of problem Coast FI gives you. Coast FI still requires you to hold down a paycheck, so from the outside, nothing about your life looks unusual at all. You're simply working, like everyone else around you appears to be. Lean FI removes your paycheck entirely, but the visible result often looks like scarcity instead of freedom, which is precisely why it gets so consistently misread by nearly everyone standing around you, including people who genuinely care and just don't have the full picture. Neither version is inherently wrong for you here at all. They're simply different trade-offs sitting on the exact same underlying ladder. And the next stage up removes that particular trade-off completely, entirely. Full FI is the stage most people actually picture when they hear the phrase financial independence at all. Here's the real definition. Your invested assets now cover your actual current lifestyle indefinitely. Not a stripped-down version of it, the way Lean FI does, but the real one. Your real housing, your real spending habits, your real vacations, your real everything, sustained without needing another paycheck for the rest of your life. This is the stage where the earlier trade-off finally disappears completely. You don't have to choose between working and shrinking your lifestyle. Both problems get solved at once, permanently. Work becomes fully optional here, not just lower stress, and not just optional in some technical sense, while your visible life quietly gets smaller around you. At Coast FI, you still needed the paycheck. At Lean FI, you kept your freedom but shrank your life to afford it. At Full FI, neither of those trade-offs applies anymore. You keep the actual life you already have, and the requirement to earn simply falls away underneath it. This is exactly why Full FI gets treated as the finish line in most conversations about financial independence, even though it's really the third stop on a four-stage ladder, not the only one worth naming. It's the version people picture, because it's the version with no visible compromise attached to it at all. Nothing shrinks, nothing gets stripped down, nothing looks different from the outside. And that's precisely what makes the identity shift here so different from the one at Lean FI. Nothing about your visible life changes when you reach this point. Your house is the same house. Your car is the same car. Your habits, your routines, your day-to-day spending, all of it stays exactly the same. Because the entire achievement happens somewhere invisible, inside a portfolio nobody else can see. Family and friends have no real way to notice this particular shift unless you tell them directly, which is often a strange position to be in. There's no outward signal, no lifestyle upgrade, no obvious marker that anything meaningful changed at all. You could reach Full FI on a completely random Tuesday and keep going to the same job the very next morning, and nobody around you would have any reason to suspect anything was different. Because from where they're standing, absolutely nothing is. When people do find out, the reactions tend to split in interesting ways. Some react with quiet disbelief, because you don't look like what they imagined financial independence would look like. Others start treating you slightly differently almost immediately, even though your actual day-to-day life hasn't changed one bit. The same house, the same routines, the same everything. The only thing that shifted was a number nobody could see, and yet suddenly people are reading your decisions differently, wondering why you're still showing up to a job you technically don't need anymore. That quiet invisibility is actually the whole point. And it's also exactly what makes this stage so easy to underestimate from the outside looking in. People generally assume financial independence looks like some dramatic, visible before and after moment. In reality, at this specific stage, it looks like absolutely nothing at all on the surface, right up until the exact moment you actually decide to use it for something. There's one stage left above this one, and it removes a very different kind of constraint entirely. One that has nothing to do with whether work is optional, and everything to do with how comfortably you get to live while it stays that way. Fat Fi sits right at the very top of this entire ladder, and it removes something none of the earlier stages actually touch. Here's the real, precise definition worth holding on to. Fat Fi means financial independence with a genuinely comfortable, above-average spending level attached to it. Not just enough to cover your current life, the way full FI does, but enough to live without ever having to think carefully about a purchase again, most of the time. No restrictions holding you back. No trade-offs left unresolved. No stripped-down anything remaining. Think back for a moment to that comparison from earlier in this video, between Lean FI and everything above it on this ladder. Lean FI meant freedom, but only by shrinking your actual lifestyle down to the essentials. Full FI removed that shrinkage, letting you keep your real, current life exactly as it is. Fat FI goes one step further than either of those. It doesn't just protect your current lifestyle, it gives you real room above it. Room to spend more freely without ever putting the independence itself at risk. This closes the entire comparison spectrum that started building all the way back at Lean FI. On one end, you have freedom purchased through genuine restriction. On the other end, now, you have freedom paired with real, comfortable abundance, with nothing pulling against the other side of it. The ladder runs all the way from the tightest, most restrictive version of independence to the loosest, most comfortable one, and Fat FI sits at that far, comfortable end of it. This is also, by a wide margin, the rarest and slowest of the four stages to actually reach. Coast FI can happen relatively early, often years before someone even considers themselves close to independent in any real sense. Lean FI and Full FI both require sustained saving over a genuinely meaningful stretch of time. But Fat FI demands something more on top of that, either an unusually high income sustained for years on end, exceptional investment growth that most people can't count on, or simply far more time invested than any of the earlier stages required in the first place. There's no real shortcut hiding inside this particular stage. It rewards whichever combination of income, growth, and patience someone happens to have, more than any other stage on this entire ladder. And because it takes the longest to reach, it also tends to arrive the most gradually, not as one dramatic, obvious crossing, but as a slow, almost unnoticed loosening of restrictions that were already becoming less necessary, well before the final threshold ever technically arrived. You might not even register the exact moment it happens. One year, a bigger purchase feels slightly less nerve-wracking than it used to. A few years later, an entire category of financial decisions that once required careful thought barely registers as a decision at all anymore. There's rarely a single dramatic before and after moment attached to Fat FI the way people sometimes imagine. It tends to sneak up gradually, revealing itself mostly in hindsight, once you look back and realize how much easier certain choices have quietly become. That gradual arrival is genuinely worth remembering because it connects directly to something you saw at the start of this entire video. None of this is theoretical or hypothetical in any way. There's a real documented, publicly shared story that shows exactly how these stages actually play out, one after another, in a real specific person's life. Anita was working what she genuinely thought was her forever career, as a software engineer for the Department of Defense, earning around $68,000 a year. Nothing about her situation looked especially unusual from the outside. Then, in 2020, she learned something that quietly changed everything about how she thought about her own future. She didn't actually have to wait until 65 years old to have real, usable options in her life. She started investing 50 to 60% of her income almost immediately after that. 2 years later, she reached Coast Fi, the exact point where her existing investments were projected to grow into a full retirement by a normal retirement age, all on their own, even without another single dollar added from that point forward. That single milestone gave her the confidence to do something most people in her position wouldn't seriously consider. She reinvented her career into part-time work, downshifted deliberately to a 4-day week, and went back to school for a master's degree, all while still investing roughly 45% of her income, alongside a small side project she'd started building on the side. Notice what actually happened here, because it's genuinely worth sitting with for a moment. She didn't wait for some final, distant number before making a real change to how she lived. Reaching Coast FI specifically, not full FI, not fat FI, just that first real stage, was enough on its own to unlock a genuinely different way of living, years before anything close to full independence ever arrived. This is exactly the specific point this entire video has been building toward, carefully, from the very beginning. Anita's own published story doesn't describe someone waiting passively for one enormous, distant number to arrive someday in the future. It describes someone recognizing a specific, real, defined stage the exact moment she crossed it, and using that recognition to make a deliberate, immediate decision about her own life, years earlier than most people would ever assume was even possible for someone in her position. She's now genuinely on track to retire in her early 40s, still working 4 days a week, entirely by choice rather than by necessity, still investing several $1,000s every month toward whichever stage comes next on this same ladder. The stages in her real story didn't all arrive at once, all bundled together into one dramatic finish line. They arrived one at a time instead, spaced out over real years, each one changing something specific and concrete about her actual day-to-day life, well before the very next stage ever showed up to change anything further at all. That's the entire real point of understanding this ladder in the first place, instead of endlessly chasing one single, distant, undefined number that never seems to get any closer, no matter how much genuine effort goes into it. Every stage on this ladder is genuinely usable the moment you reach it, not just once you've climbed all the way to the very top of it, whenever that might eventually happen to be. Remember that recruiter, still talking away, laying out a genuinely good offer that you calmly, quietly turned down. You now know exactly, precisely, where that specific calm actually came from. It wasn't confidence you were somehow just born with, and it wasn't recklessness either, no matter how it might have felt in that exact moment. It was one specific, definable stage on this ladder, quietly crossed at some earlier point in your life, changing what a job author actually needed to be before saying yes ever felt necessary again. Maybe that specific moment maps to Coast FI, where saving became optional, even though working itself still wasn't. Maybe it maps to Lean FI instead, where you'd already built enough to walk away entirely, just with a smaller, quieter footprint than you'd once imagined. Maybe it's Full FI, where nothing about your visible, everyday life needed to shrink at all in order to get there. Or maybe it's further off still, sitting closer to Fat FI than you currently realize, even if the signs are already quietly showing up. Here's the mistake almost everyone makes with this specific ladder, and it's worth naming directly, out loud. People assume they need the very top stage before any of this genuinely applies to their own life. They assume real, usable options only exist once they reach Fat FI, or at the very least, Full FI, and quietly treat everything below that as not really counting yet, as though it were just a waiting room on the way to something that actually matters. But Anita's story proves otherwise, clearly and specifically. Coast FI alone was enough to change her entire career path, years before anything close to full independence. Lean FI alone is enough for someone to walk away from work completely, just with a smaller, more modest footprint attached to it. You don't need to reach the very top of this ladder before you're allowed to start making real decisions from wherever you currently stand on it. Misidentifying your own stage, assuming you need Fat FI when Lean FI or Coast FI already quietly hands you real, usable options right now, is probably the single biggest reason people keep working in exactly the same way, at exactly the same pace, for years longer than their own actual numbers genuinely require them to. The question was never really how much total money you need in some final undefined sense. It's which one of these 4 real specific stages you've already, quietly, without fully realizing it, actually crossed. So which exact one is it for you? Are you closer to Coast FI, quietly building toward that very first real shift in how your money works for you? Already past it, watching work slowly become optional, even though it still doesn't quite feel that way yet? Or maybe you're further along this entire ladder than you've been giving yourself real credit for. There's genuinely no wrong answer here, and absolutely no rush to have it figured out today. This channel exists to keep mapping thresholds exactly like this one, the quiet moments that change more than they first appear to, long before anyone else notices. If today's video helped you see this ladder more clearly, subscribing means you won't miss what comes next. Drop your actual stage in the comments below. I read every single one, and this is genuinely far from the last video in this series.